In 1911, at the age of 9, Walter Elias Disney moved from the small farm town of Marceline, Missouri, an idyllic little slice of the American Midwest where he had spent much of his childhood, to the bustling metropolis of Kansas City. Forced to provide for his family with his paper route after their previously poor farming prospects left them financially imperiled, the hustle and bustle of city life was a harsh adjustment for young Disney, who had grown accustomed to the comfortable pace and constant adventure he found exploring his family's farm. He did, however, have a single, solitary place where he could find some solace, a refuge from the harsh realities of the world, a place where he could still be content to dream. Electric Park, touted as Kansas City's Coney Island, was the brainchild of 3 beer baron brothers. Initially devised as a means to move their merchandise and increase foot traffic through their brewery, they later saw the profit and potential of the park and built a bigger expansion site disconnected from the business of the brewery entirely. The version of the park Walt grew up with opened in 1907. Patterned after the style of the 1893 Columbian Exposition, it featured live entertainment, bands, rides, games, alligator wrestling, electricity and illumination displays, a then novel concept for the general public, and a nightly fireworks show over the park. It was, in short, the closest and only thing Walt Disney had that captured the awe, excitement, and adventure of the childhood he had been robbed of prematurely. Throughout the rest of his time in Kansas City, up until the day he packed his bags and left for California in 1923, Walt Disney was a loyal patron of Electric Park. Over the years, Walt grew up, volunteered in the Red Cross at the end of World War I, and even founded his own cartooning company, starting first with simple drawings before eventually moving on to the sale of small animated reels to local Kansas City theaters. Countless times his creative ambitions were spurned, shunned, and turned away. His life had hardly turned out the way he wanted it to, but he still clung to a single, solitary dream, a dream he had shared with the animators he employed at his small-town cartooning company. Taking his underlings on one last tour of Electric Park before he packed his bags and attempted to strike silver in Tinseltown, Walt prophetically declared, "One of these days, I'm going to build an amusement park, and it's going to be clean." The bright lights, pristine white, and palpable hum of both excitement and incandescent filaments left an indelible mark on the impressionable mind of a young Walt Disney. These half-forgotten, misremembered, distorted recollections that he retained of Electric Park would coalesce into the shape of a shining dream within his own mind's eye, a dream that would later become Disneyland. Many years later, upon taking his daughters to Griffith Park in Los Angeles, his desire to make a place where parents and children could play together caused that lifelong dream to resurface. And the rest, as they say, is history. Since it first opened in 1955, Disneyland has welcomed in roughly 11 million park guests a year. The much larger Disney World, otherwise known as the Florida Project, averages about 50 million park attendees a year. A fair number of the attendees at both parks are children, as according to modern studies and anecdotal evidence, on a given day anywhere from 40 to 60% of park guests are families with children under the age of 18. Of that small portion of Disney parkgoers that are actually children, though, an even smaller percentage yet still becomes so enamored with the impossibly polished, beautifully fictitious facades of its fantasy world that they want to become a part of the magic themselves when they grow up. One such child, the young boy visiting Disney World with his mom and dad at the very same age Walt was when he first visited Electric Park, found himself transfixed by the seamless, solitary, self-contained world the parks created. Wanting desperately to know more and peel the curtain back, he asked his uncle what it would take to work at a place like Disneyland someday. Upon being told that the people who design theme parks are called Imagineers, the boy vowed that one day he would join in their number and follow in the footsteps of the late great Walt Disney to create a park of his very own. Which he did, just not in any way he ever expected. Because that little boy grew up to be Good Times with Scar, and the park he went on to build was Scarland. Good Times with Scar wanted to be a Disney Imagineer ever since he was 9 years old. But even before then, his very first dream job was still related to Disneyland in some way. He wanted to be the Disneyland train conductor. Influenced in large part by his grandfather, who was an avid painter, Scar showed passion for the creative arts from a very young age, taking up photography to capture the scenic surroundings of his home in the Pacific United States. He was also an avid swimmer, and specialized in butterfly, which, according to this humble and unbiased narrator, is both the hardest and coolest swimming stroke. Scar's passion for theme parks was impossible for his family to ignore, and one fateful Christmas he received the present of a lifetime: the chance to enroll in a theme park design course taught by a former Imagineer. Frothing at the mouth, the young Scar leapt at the chance to learn anything he could about the then-secretive order of Disney's brightest minds. The instructor, who took a shine to the young boy's passion, told him to reach out again once he turned 18 to talk about potentially procuring him an apprenticeship. Overjoyed, Scar poured himself into the study of the arts of engineering, analyzing his favorite films like Star Wars and picking them apart, their set design, fantasizing about dark rides set in a galaxy far, far away, well before there were even whispers of a Disney merger, and filling countless notebooks with Imagineering plans for the future. When Scar turned 16, however, he fell seriously ill with a neuromuscular disease that would ultimately upend his entire life. His promising swimming career, which had led him to the state finals in high school, dried up practically overnight, and his entire support system evaporated with it. Throughout it all, he tried to hold on to the single sliver of hope that if he recovered, he might still have a chance to make his dream come true. But as his sickness progressed, worsening from headaches to extreme fatigue to being rendered completely immobile due to the degeneration of his legs and diaphragm, he began to realize that his dream of Imagineering had been, through no fault of his own, forever deferred. Still, Scar refused to let his disability keep him down for too long. His focus remained on photography and painting as his primary creative outlets, but now more than ever before, video games became his refuge, a place he could escape to. Scar especially enjoyed the early Roller Coaster Tycoon games, through which he could vicariously fulfill his fantasy of theme park development. Though he did have one obvious complaint. Every building, ride, and asset in the game was prefabricated, leaving little room for customization. A creative and creator since the day he was born, Scar wanted a way to design his own buildings, paths, and attractions to construct a completely original park from the ground up. Fortunately for him, though, the virtual medium through which he would construct his dream theme park simply didn't exist yet, and it was only a matter of time before it did. The origins of Scarland can be traced back to GoodTimesWithScar's very first ever Minecraft video, all the way back in April of 2011. His earliest YouTube uploads revolved primarily around Call of Duty gameplay, but even then, you could still occasionally hear him professing a quiet fondness for the crude, imperfect, blocky game that would eventually become his primary creative conduit. Scar's first ever Minecraft videos were recorded on the first ever Scarland, his seminal single-player world that he built with his loyal co-pilot and cat companion Jelly sitting by his side. These initial attempts to design the theme park of his dreams, however, were somewhat imprecise, perhaps due to the rather unsophisticated state of the game in its early alphas. The original Scarland also had the rather unfortunate habit of spontaneously combusting.
Okay, as we get started, I want to let you know that yes, Scarland did burn down again for the second time. Okay, we got that out of here. We got that out of the way. It's done. I was trying to build a super awesome minecart roller coaster, and it was going to be really sweet, and well, unfortunately, I burnt everything down again. Yes, Scar has problems with fire.
Perhaps due to the park constantly catching on fire, or perhaps due to the lack of block diversity in Minecraft's early days, the original Scarland was never quite able to live up to its creator's vision for a theme park of his very own. Scar continued to periodically try his hand at designing roller coasters and theme park attractions within the game of Minecraft, but for the most part, his content shifted towards building tutorials, showing others how he approached the limited set of tools within the game to channel his own creativity. For half a decade, he continued to toil away in relative isolation, his audience steadily growing from hundreds to thousands to hundreds of thousands, until February of 2016, when Scar was finally invited to share his talents with an entire community's worth of content creators. Joining the Hermitcraft server in Season 4, the habitual hermit had finally found his place amongst his own kind, and for another half-decade more, he continued to hone his craft, not only as a creative and an artist, but as a storyteller and innovator. From the ambitious terraforming projects he undertook in Season 6, to the retro-chic boutiques of Aq Town in Season 7, and the snake oil-selling top-hat tomfoolery of Bodum in Season 8, it seemed like each of Scar's Hermitcraft bases was building on the lessons he had learned from the last. Unbeknownst to his audience, however, all of this was ultimately building towards the creation of his ultimate dream base, one that would combine the stylized natural terraforming of Pirate Cove, the antiquated architectural styles of his mayoral shopping district, and the showmanship and presentation of the Swagon. Any good theme park owner and operator worth their salt is a bit of a crook, con man, capitalist, and creative all rolled into one, and as luck would have it, those characteristics fit the bill for every character Scar had played on Hermitcraft so far. When Season 8 of Hermitcraft ended with Scar and his friends hurtling headlong into the Bodum hole in an attempt to avoid the apocalyptic arrival of their world's wayward moon, Scar figured it was finally time to take the plunge and attempt what had previously been impossible. After having spent so many years living in fear that his dream had forever been denied, he was finally going to make Scarland a reality. Scar uploaded his first episode of Hermitcraft Season 9 on March 6th, 2022. After recording nearly 26 hours of in-game footage, his first episode was a little later than everyone else's, but that was primarily due to the ambitious scope of his plans. Within the span of his first few episodes, Scar raised up an entire forested elven village for the creation of specialty cookies and baked goods, which he planned to sell to his fellow hermits around spawn. Starting a theme park was hardly cheap, after all, and the idea behind his early season game plan was to hit the ground running and devote all of his time to the server's economy and infrastructure so as to reap the rewards later by plowing his profits back into the construction of Scarland. This business model was inspired by a famous fictional character for whom Scar clearly felt a great personal affinity, a powerful elf named Ernest J. Keebler. Competition for his specialty baked goods shop, however, was significantly stiffer than expected. While his cookies were much more nourishing than the default vanilla-flavored Minecraft model, Scar faced unexpected resistance from another bakery of the big box shop variety, Rendog's Gigapies, which were currently taking the server by storm. By mid-April, the Hermitcraft economy had reached full swing, with most of its shops still centrally located around spawn, and Ren's Log Shop and Pie Dispenser were poised with prime positioning to capitalize upon the market. Scar's whimsical elven kingdom, located on the further shores of the Spawn Lagoon, had no choice but to expand even further to attract new business, diversifying its holdings and opening up a Minecraft mattress store, at the behest of his fans who thought his skin looked like that of a matador. This, of course, made perfect sense, but only to Scar himself. Scar's cookie shop and mattress store, unfortunately, were too niche to make much in the way of profit, though perhaps that had something to do with the shopfront facades being almost completely obscured by the atmospheric detailing of his fantastical elven forest. In search of even more resources to fuel the countless blocks he would surely need for the eventual creation of Scarland, Scar also decorated Tango's raid farm and villager trading hall in exchange for permission to use its outputs on his personal projects. Throughout this early season industrial proliferation, he kept a tight lip when it came to his true plans for Scarland outside of a few cryptic teasers. All anyone knew at the time was that Scar had been planning his megabase for this season since he started playing Minecraft back in 2010. But what no one knew yet was that the dream that inspired it had been simmering beneath the surface for far longer. The first hints of what Scar's true ambitions for the season were only manifested in the form of the miniature decked-out clone he constructed at Tango Starter Base for the server's Secret Fools event. Though its connection to Scarland was hardly obvious at first, this surprisingly grindy side project was indicative of Scar's focus for the season. He wanted to create highly themed interactive experiences for his fellow hermits, first and foremost. By mid-May, everyone else on the server had already moved out of the spawn district and into the phase of scouting out the area for their respective megabases. Scar, however, was still hard at work putting the finishing touches on his elven forest, using this as an opportunity to do one last practice run to test out his fantastical foliage creation skills, since they would need to be at their sharpest later on during the season. With the return on investment from his shop still dismal, he turned to the drudgery of the mines once more, and after getting accustomed to the new post-Caves and Cliffs terrain generation meta, he was grinding out countless stacks of deep slate diamond ore. Resurfacing from his sprawling underground branch mines, he decided to display his newfound wealth in the form of a prominent pillar at spawn, and in doing so, accidentally instigated the great server-wide diamond pillar debacle. Before long, Grian, Doc, Cub, Impulse, and Pearl were all competing to see whose tower could climb the highest. Scar affectionately referred to his column as the escrow pillar, since all the diamonds he needed for park construction costs were tied up in it, though at the time he had no way of appreciating its potentially inadvisable economic effects. On May 26, 2022, in yet another bid to secure funding for the park, Scar opened a Redstone component shop, Tomato Computers, a knockoff of his previous Apple knockoff, Cherry Computers. Unfortunately for him, this was the worst time to open a new business venture, since during this very same episode, the Great Diamond Pillar Race was officially concluded in dramatic fashion. All the ore blocks involved in the creation of the monoliths were mined down into cold hard cash, and the resulting influx of diamonds into the economy threatened to completely collapse the Hermitcraft stock market through skyrocketing inflation. In the short term, though, with a new mega shop installed and outfitted with a consistently in-demand commodity, Scar stock was selling like hotcakes. Blissfully ignorant, he had no idea that a recession, statistically the worst time to own, open, and operate a theme park, was about to strike the server. Finally flush with profits, in his next episode, he would at last break ground on a project over a decade in the making. On June 20th, 2022, after a temporary zoning issue with his ornery old go-to-the-next-door neighbor, GoodTimesWithScar officially broke ground on his magnum opus. In his very first episode's worth of progress, he constructed a massive chunk of the park's Main Street, a collection of eclectic storefronts based on New Orleans Square in Disney Anaheim and Main Street USA in Walt Disney World Orlando, that attempted to fuse different time periods and architectural styles into a uniquely anachronistic mismatch that screamed theme park. From late June to early July, Scar's primary focus was on fleshing out the structure for the initial section of the park. In the wise words of his own grandfather, You can't paint the whiskers on a dog before even painting the dog in the first place. Constructing the start of Main Street in these 4 discrete chunks also helped solidify Scar's unifying creative vision in the minds of his viewers. The shops that populated Main Street would not only be functional from an in-universe perspective, but they would also serve as the housing for his storage system, a gimmick that the scatterbrained and pathologically disorganized Scar was in dire need of in order to incentivize himself to keep a tidy working environment. On a deeper philosophical level, however, this fusion of practical with fantastical was built into the very core of Scarland from the start. Theme parks in the real world are often limited by the disappointing constraints of material reality. Their beautiful facades conceal a utilitarian apparatus beneath that provides them with access to the beating heart of the park's infrastructure. It was this reality that Scar sought to capture in all its intricacies, and Main Street provided his viewers with a powerful glimpse into the guiding principles that had influenced his designs. Every building had a backstage section, or as Scar called it, an off-floor corridor that provided parkgoers with a window into the lives of Scarland's hard-working cast and crew that toiled tirelessly to sustain the illusion of its magic. By July 18th, 2022, the entire left side of Scarland's Main Street had been penciled in. With the server updating to 1.19, the addition of mangrove wood and the packed mud block set gave Scar countless new opportunities to experiment with the shifting style and palette of each building along the block. Though he had yet to fully detail their interiors, each exterior shell already made the function of each building abundantly clear. An in-park hotel yet to be populated by guests, a secluded and mysterious magic shop that would be home to the one and only Magic Hands Man, in an homage to classic boardwalk coin slot fortune tellers, and a pink and pastel candy shop constructed as an homage to one of Scar's favorite sweet dispensaries along the real-life Main Street, USA. The detailing didn't stop here, however, as the ducting on the conjoined roofline concealed rotating show lighting and speakers that could be raised and lowered remotely to illuminate the parade route down Main Street for evening festivities. The sheer scope of Scar's progress on the park thus far was impressive, but it also underscored a rapidly emerging resource constraint that this new phase of construction was coming into conflict with: the lack of storage space. Because the Main Street shops were supposed to be Scar's storage system, that meant he technically didn't have anywhere to store his supplies just yet, and the demands for an increasingly diverse swath of building materials resulted in the creation of a massive chest monster. The detritus and debris of construction littered all over the previously pristine Main Street. This, obviously, posed a big problem for future park operations. When Walt Disney first laid out plans to make his long-held dream a reality, sanitation was of the utmost importance to him. Amusement parks of his time were notorious for their poor hygiene standards, and across the country, the one commonality that united every boardwalk and pleasure park was the refuse scattered to and fro down every boulevard, making them a less than reputable place for the average American family to visit. Walt's staunch, almost obsessive fixation upon the creation of a child-friendly, clean, and safe atmosphere was one of the major distinctions that allowed Disneyland to separate itself from its competition, and create its brand of unparalleled immersion free from the littered detritus of reality. Even after Walt's passing, his family and future stewards of the company understood just how pivotal his philosophy of park sanitation was to their operations. In constructing the Florida project, otherwise known as Disney World's Magic Kingdom, Disney Imagineers decided to build the entire park a full story above the Floridian water table to create the Utilidor system. This revolutionary architectural device allowed cast members to not only more rapidly traverse the park through a narrow network of subterranean tunnels, but for staff to seamlessly dispose of all garbage into a sophisticated subterranean waste disposal system without park guests ever being the wiser. Walt Disney, it could be said, was a fastidious man, who prided himself on meticulous organization. GoodTimesWithScar, on the other hand, is more or less the exact opposite. Because of Minecraft's notoriously inflexible inventory management system, his creativity was forced to take the shape of cluttered clusters of project shulker boxes, scattered to and fro around the Scarland campus. And so, on August 2nd, 2022, Scar sought out the services of the person who would eventually become Scarland's first official employee, Pearlescent Moon, the cleaning lady. Though at this time Pearl wasn't yet the in-house park sanitation manager, she agreed to take a bid for Scarland's garbage problem as an independent contractor, to the tune of 170 diamonds for 6 hours worth of non-stop reorganization. This ponderous price tag would have posed no problem for Scar, seeing as he had just recently liquidated his diamond pillar and was flush with cash. Unfortunately, Scar had recently been forced to flush all of his cash down the toilet. Literally. Yes, on the Hermitcraft server, the times were indeed a-changing. As a result of the capitalistic contest Scar himself had inadvertently instigated, prices on the server were spiraling out of control thanks to inflation. This economic instability would eventually result in the complete and total overhaul of Hermitcraft's governance, transitioning from a sort of gleeful communalist anarcho-capitalism to an out-and-out monarchy. To save the world from impending disaster, Scar's former baked goods rival Rendog had been unilaterally declared the king of Hermitcraft, thanks in large part to the intervention of a bug-eyed, moss-cloaked kingmaker known as B000100. The server's persistent political and financial instability was obviously a serious concern for the future of Scarland, prompting the park's creator to silently consider if he should become a collaborator of the new royal regime to avoid earning the monarchy's ire. In the meantime, though, undaunted by geopolitical turmoil, the work on Scarland had no choice but to continue. Over the course of a video that took an entire month's worth of work to produce, Scar finished the entire right side of Main Street in a single fell swoop. With much of the shopfront facades in place, the first major theme park forced perspective trick Scar employed in the construction of Scarland was finally becoming easier to spot. As the player walked down Main Street, the shops gradually began to decline in height, so that the things Scar was eventually planning to build at the end of Main Street would look even bigger by comparison. This major update to the park's entrance corridor was completed with the capstone of a jelly flag at the heart of the heart-shaped central gardens, and served as the announcement of the park's official mascot. Much like Walt had Mickey, Scarland would be dedicated to Scar's feline friend Jelly, who had been with him for longer than his YouTube channel and served as the source for so much of his inspiration. Unfortunately, despite Scar's intentions to buckle down on park construction, the vice-like grip of the monarchy was becoming impossible to ignore. With no other choice, GoodTimesWithScar was forced to take action to ensure the geopolitical survival of the park project by allying himself with the king. And in keeping with the theme of his season, he chose to do so in a manner befitting of the mythical origins of the House of Mouse. In 1937, with clammy hands and ink-stained fingers, Walt Disney was about to take the biggest swing of his career, bigger than even moving from Kansas to Los Angeles. He was about to stake the future of his firm and his family on the release of the world's first ever hand-drawn, cel-animated feature film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Industry naysayers were beginning to nag. He had expended all the capital and goodwill he had amassed, and the box office was bracing for impact. The premiere needed to be a star-studded affair that promised the viewing public a motion picture unlike any they had ever seen, and ever the showman, Walt was prepared to deliver. To capture audience imaginations, the red carpet for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs would premiere featuring a model replica of the dwarf's cottage, designed at proportional height, as if implicitly inviting the audience to step inside of its fantastical world by viewing the film. Looking on at the miniature display, however, Walt seemed remarkably unworried by his future financial prospects. Instead, already looking ahead past the premiere and on to his next venture, he remarked aloud that he would like to make a full-scale model of the set for his children to play in, a dream he would eventually realize through Disneyland with the attraction Snow White and Her Adventures, a dark ride that allowed park guests and children of all ages to explore the story from the perspective of its titular character. In any case, however, Walt's career trajectory was abundantly clear. He started out first as a studio magnate and an innovative juggernaut of the motion picture scene, then transitioned to theme park operator. GoodTimesWithScar, however, had done pretty much exactly the opposite. He started out first by building a theme park, then a theater, and finally a feature film to show in it. On August 25th, 2022, Hot Guy, the movie, director GoodTimesWithScar's blockbuster cinematic masterpiece, officially premiered at the Scarland Main Street Theater. Scarland had its mascot in Jelly, and now it had its first original intellectual property, Scar's very own anti-hero alter ego, who terrorized his servermates by shooting them at random with great velocity. Much like Walt Disney, whose earliest animated shorts were propaganda films for the US government, Hot Guy the movie was both a piece of propaganda and an audition reel meant to ingratiate Scar into King Wren's favor, so that he might join the monarch's royal guard. The business-savvy Scar had caught wind of the fact that the king would be redistributing all the diamonds he had collected in the form of royal salaries to his most loyal soldiers, so by becoming a bow-toting superhero, Scar was shrewdly attempting to secure the park's continued financial future. With these newly acquired funds, he was able to start paying down his outstanding debt to the cleaning lady and funneled more investment into the backstage off-floor infrastructural areas of the park. To bridge the transition between the end of Main Street and the lush, verdant landscaping of the park's central plaza, Scar was forced to employ even more Imagineering tips and tricks to direct the viewer's eye away from its utilitarian utilities. The sides of the buildings were painted with go-away green terracotta, and on top of the shops, Scar installed the tops of fake trees poking above the roofline to mingle with the actual foliage surrounding the show buildings. This technique is perhaps most notably applied to great effect in the real-world theme park attraction Dinosaur, located in Animal Kingdom at Walt Disney World, which, according to this humble and unbiased narrator, was a really cool dark ride that definitely shouldn't be closed down. With the hub of Scarland constructed and the landscaping disguised to cultivate the appearance of a verdant Central Park, Scar was now officially prepared to tackle the nitty-gritty details that lurked behind the picturesque postcard view of Main Street. By mid-September, he was dealing with the grunt work of the park's guts, Scarland's garbage system. Drawing upon inspiration from the previously mentioned Utilidor system, he installed an underground superhighway to disperse miscellaneous junk from his inventory back into his storage system through a series of item filters. As the season progressed and the first hints of his neighbors' builds were beginning to invade his view, Scar's progress on the park continued. The functional components of his base were mostly put in place now, although they would continue to malfunction and break down throughout the rest of the season. Still, his diligent service to the king and completion of royal quests had stocked his coffers with enough funds to finally pay back his debt to the cleaning lady, as well as hire the second unofficial member of Scarland's staff, Zombie Cleo of Cast Services. Scar initially retained Cleo's services as an armor stand wizard extraordinaire to construct a founder statue at the center of the park's hub. Their work, which paid homage to Jelly and to the iconic Disneyland statue of Walt and Mickey walking hand in hand, cemented Cleo as a critical part of Scar's future vision for populating the park. However, Scar's amicable relations with his employees were about to be put to the test in a major way, as the server's dissatisfaction with monarchic mismanagement had finally reached the boiling point of revolution, and his very own cleaning lady had been caught in the crossfire. A part of the so-called terrorist splinter cell known only as the Soup Group, Pearlescent Moon had quickly risen to the status of the king's public enemy number one, despite never actually intending to become an enemy of the state in the first place. Having initially begun as a trio of soup-slurping hermits who simply happened to be basing near each other, Impulse SV, Gemini Tay, and Pearl were all implicated in the plot to overthrow the king when Impulse decided to host a masquerade ball in the king's castle, without Rendog's permission. During the festivities, the royal vault was robbed Robin Hood style, and diamonds were redistributed to the partygoers by the Soup Group in the form of so-called party favors. Despite the fact that many of the king's own architects, advisors, and viziers were in attendance that night, albeit in disguise, Ren was determined to bring the perpetrators to justice. And for that, he would need his most loyal enforcer to roll up his sleeves and bloody his hands. On September 29th, Hot Guy was officially commissioned by the king to bring in the 12 partygoers in attendance at the Exuma Masquerade, with the promise that his pockets would be lined with iridescent blue gemstones for every head he successfully hunted. However, King Ren may have overpromised on the payment Scar was to be receiving, as thanks to the recent string of thefts, the treasury was almost completely depleted. To compensate, the Imperial Mint began mass-producing its own currency, Royal Emeralds, which were immediately injected into the server shopping district, and immediately rejected by its shoppers, making this the second time this season that the Hermitcraft economy was facing a potentially inflationary financial crisis. Perhaps recognizing that his allegiance to the king might be ill-fated, Scar set to work erecting yet another shop in the shopping district, this time selling off his services as Hot Guy to the civilian public, so they could rent their very own superhero. Though he had yet to finish the interior, he promised that it would soon be chock full of Hot Guy memorabilia, such as toy bows, volleyballs, and Hot Guy-themed pinup calendars. Nobody on the server seemed interested in purchasing Hot Guy's services, though, but perhaps that was because they were too busy fleeing in terror from him. Throughout the month of October, Scar became a gleeful menace on the server, swooping down from the sky under cover of darkness to snipe every participant in the rebellion's masquerade. He then impaled their severed heads one by one on a series of pikes outside the king's castle, in order to give a visual indication of his progress to the increasingly demented feudal lord of the manor. Ironically, all of this unpleasantness could have been avoided if the resistance realized that the king had yet to make good on his promise of a royal salary, and simply paid Scar to leave them alone. Yes, if there was only a single common denominator driving all the actions of Scar's character in the first half of Hermitcraft Season 9, it was indubitably the influence of the almighty dollar. Despite Scar's profound disinterest in the resistance and royalty as anything more than a means to become an out-and-out war profiteer, tensions on the server were quickly reaching a boiling point. Known instigator Grian, who had been responsible for setting off countless other server-wide conflicts in previous seasons, had attempted to turn over a new leaf by starting a resistance to the resistance, but even with his assistance, Hot Guy couldn't keep the whole server in check all by his lonesome. The Soup Group was growing emboldened after a recent string of successful shopping district pranks, even going so far as to infiltrate the king's own chambers to spy on a secret roundtable meeting. And all the while, King Ren was becoming increasingly paranoid and disturbed, haunted by the ticking clock of his own mortality, its pendulum swinging on the whim of his shadowy advisor. Sooner or later, something had to give. The monarchy's time on Hermitcraft was almost up. On October 15th, 2022, Scar was summoned by the king to construct the second phase of his royal vault upon the nether roof, once more having been tasked with defending the monarchy's ill-gotten diamonds as his anti-heroic alter ego, Hawkeye. However, sensing an opportunity to market, merchandise, and spread the Scarland brand, and perhaps secretly convinced that the democratic opposition would ultimately prevail, Scar decided to construct a gift shop in the Thunderdome of the King's Royal Vault instead, in order to sell commemorative memorabilia to the Resistance as they raided the dungeon. As you might imagine, a pissed-off and angry proletariat raiding the royal dungeon to rob back their spoils of their labor wasn't exactly flush with cash. This venture, like many of Scar's businesses, was both ill-conceived and ill-fated. Thanks to a predictable last-minute betrayal of the king by Grian, whose resistance of the resistance turned into a resistance of the resistance resisting the resistance, the monarchy was defeated and the nether vault was cracked open. However, in the chaotic and confusing aftermath of the final skirmish, the remaining diamonds disappeared completely, never to be seen again. Mad King Rendog was summarily sacked from his post, the royal emeralds were removed from circulation, and the server slowly began to recuperate from a prolonged period of geopolitical and economic upheaval. Luckily, after this Hermitcraft revolution, Scar had something scheduled on the docket to help bring the whole server back together. October 23, 2022 was marked by the first ever Hermitcraft charity event for Gamers Outreach, a non-profit foundation dedicated to bringing video game systems to hospitals in order to give younger patients a temporary reprieve from their treatments and a chance to play. The idea for the stream initially stemmed from one of King Ren's quest bulletins, but in actual fact, Scar had been wanting to collaborate with Gamers Outreach since first seeing their go-karts at PAX West and speaking with their founder about his own hospital experiences. In the inaugural year of the charity event, the Hermitcraft server raised a total of $420,000, cementing the power of its community when pooling together their resources for a singular cause. Just 3 days later, the chaos from the monarchy's dissolution and the minigame-filled 4-hour charity extravaganza was gradually beginning to subside, and Hermitcraft was gradually returning to a state of normalcy. Well, as normal as Hermitcraft could possibly be. October the 26th started much like any other day for Good Times with Scar. He began by trying to wrangle a deadly, dangerous mob into one of his immaculate builds for its use as a decoration. After putting a Magic Hands Man evoker in the window of the magic shop to act like a fortune-telling booth, he was whisked backstage to finish installing all the remaining interior decorations for the park's storage modules. With this massive milestone finally reached, Scar officially declared Part 1 of Phase 1 complete, and to celebrate, Scar had a special surprise for his audience. More merchandising opportunities for the park. Proudly, he relayed that Scarland now came equipped with jelly ear headbands, commemorative popcorn buckets, and perpetually misshapen melting jelly ice cream bars. But before Scar could proceed with the second half of Scarland Phase 1 and break ground on construction of the park's first proper icon, the entire server was sucked through a space-time rift into a parallel dimension on the other side of the Minecraft multiverse. No, I'm not kidding. The first leg of the Hermitcraft and Empires SMP crossover lasted for the entirety of the month of November. Due to the meddling interference of the robotic love child of Scar's two neighbors, Grian and Mumbo, the Hermits were stranded in a foreign world full of gods, queens, monsters, and kingdoms for the foreseeable future, while they worked on a way to reopen the rift and return home. During his time in Empires, Scar wound up in the bedroom of a giant and was made the official deputy of a western boomtown by a tiny toy sheriff named Timmy. After having been embroiled in so many overlapping arcs and overarching projects on the Hermitcraft server, this brief respite through roleplay on the Empire server helped Scar recharge his batteries for what he would eventually come to call Hermitcraft Season 9 2.0. On December 9th, 2022, the Hermits returned to their native reality, with their new friends tagging along behind them to spend the holiday season together. Wanting to put the park's very best foot forward, Scar completely redecorated Scarland for the holiday season, with leafy spruce garlands, snow layers spilling over the eaves of the Main Street shops, and a Selig-esque crooked Christmas tree in the center of the park's hub. The fresh coat of paint came at just the right time, too, as Scarland was about to have its very first ever guests. One-time Goblin Fwip and full-time Gremlin Scott S. Major both checked into the Scarland Hotel during their stay on the Hermitcraft server, despite the fact that the hotel lacked any actual rooms to book. Not to be discouraged by this minor inconvenience, Fwip decided to construct a suite of his very own within the footprint of the hotel. Touched by the initiative he had taken, Scar decided to surprise him with an early Christmas gift, a custom mattress from his long-forgotten Matador mattress store, complete with a complimentary Ravager. Even as the Hermitcraft half of the Empire's crossover crawled on, Scar continued to pour his passion into the park, re-energized for the next major stage of its construction. As part of the gift exchange between the two servers, Scar received a meticulous reconstruction of the Razor Crest from The Mandalorian from Mythical Sausage, complete with more sweet Star Wars merchandise for the park gift shops to sell. And on December 24th, 2022, Scar decided to give himself an early Christmas present too, by breaking ground on the second half of Phase 1. Literally, at the edge of the park, he began raising a completely custom cliffside from the ground up, to form the foundation for Scarland's first major icon, or weenie in official Disney theme parks parlance, the Scarland Castle wherein Queen Jelly would reside. Throughout the month of January 2023, as ominous storm clouds and dark leather-winged dragons circled overhead nearby, Scar continued to chip away at the terraforming for his castle's custom landscape. With the stony sloping sides of the cliffs all placed, he next turned his attention to the creation of a custom fantasy biome with artificial cubic trees. The inspiration for the striking, surreal shaping of the terrain and trees stemmed from conceptual artist Ivan Earle, the crotchety but creatively inspired man tasked with creating the timeless, strikingly blocky silhouettes that would come to define the visual aesthetic for one of Disney's most visually striking Golden Age animated features, Sleeping Beauty. Earle's iconic visuals would additionally be adapted into the landscapes of a real-world theme park that served to inspire Scarland, Disneyland Paris. Perhaps due to the influence of the dungeon found in Disneyland Paris' castle, or perhaps due to the dragon hovering nearby, Scar soon began ruminating on the prospect of constructing a dragon-themed coaster underneath the custom-made footprint of his castle's cliffside domain. The last major addition to Scarland in the month of January was a minor theme park touch that was near and dear to Scar's heart: the infrastructure for a mobile, autonomous trolley network to enable greater accessibility and ease of transit for park patrons. As the calendar rolled over to February, however, the majority of his attention was devoted to the construction of the castle. Having long harbored a love-hate relationship for Minecraft castles, in that he loved to hate on them for their predominantly monochromatic stone brick block palettes, Queen Jelly's royal residence would be the first castle Scar had ever constructed in all his years playing Minecraft. Because of this, he agonized over every stylistic flourish and block selected, meticulously crafting his masterpiece to be as striking and awe-inspiring as possible within the game's limited color options. By February 10th, Scar had finished the castle's outer walls and the grand entrance hall. As pointed out by fellow blocky theme park aficionado Elodie.txt, however, even in this preliminary, unfinished state, one of the castle's biggest tricks of forced perspective was already well in the works, with the exponentially sloping walls of the castle serving to draw the eye inward and upward to make its eventual towers and spires seem all the taller despite their subtle shift in scale. This inconspicuous manipulation of size and color banded differentiation between different layers of the structure to create height is a trick Scar borrowed from the actual Imagineer-designed Disney castles and weenies around the world. Additionally, even with just the Great Hall in place, the meticulously placed sightlines of the park were laid bare, as all the way down Main Street, the buildings of Scarland were laid out in a perfectly straight and symmetrical line, leading up to the gold block at the heart of the castle to symbolize Disneyland Anaheim's iconic golden spike, driven into the ground by Walt himself. Throughout the rest of March, Scar continued to labor away on the castle, erecting its towering spires bit by bit, and filling in the surrounding landscape to link his custom castle cliffside to the server's shopping district. Adding a balloon vendor cart to the firework viewing plaza to sell custom-made jelly balloons provided by park merchandise director Hoffen, Scar's focal point for the entirety of his dreamland was drawing closer to completion. He also installed three-dimensional projectors to map out the front of the castle face for a multimedia component of the long-awaited Scarland fireworks shows. Like all the other practical theme park infrastructure, he found a clever way to hide these lighting rigs, burying them behind the foliage of his custom biome's treeline. Though it would take another season of Hermitcraft for CubFan135 to start mass-producing fireworks on an industrial scale, Scar initially planned to contact his former Convex partner's services as an all-around in-game wizard to create fireworks for the nightly Scarland pyrotechnic displays. Now that the castle was drawing to a close, too, he commissioned Cast Services Clio to start peppering in armor stands to populate the park, including a Queen Jelly walk-around costume character to celebrate the opening of her new palace. At long last, it seemed like Scar's full vision for the park was finally taking shape. The Hermitcraft server, usually plagued with chaos and controversy, was enjoying a halcyon epoch of peace and tranquility. It seemed like nothing could stop the full steam-ahead progress of Scarland's great big beautiful dream. Nothing short of Scar himself, of course. May 3rd, 2023. The incident occurs. The dawn of May 3rd started just like any other normal, ordinary day on the Hermitcraft server, which meant that Scar's good friend and next-door neighbor Grian was once again procrastinating on finishing the back of his base. When Scar attempted to convince him to be productive through good-natured peer pressure, Green decided to take advantage of Scar's easily distracted nature by peer pressuring him in turn, luring him into dilly-dallying with the one thing guaranteed to get his attention, and the one thing Scar had incessantly coveted all season long: diamonds. Equipping their elytra, Green and Scar flew over the tree line of the theme park, leaving its safety behind, and heading for the ominous, gaping sinkhole wherein Scar's next-door neighbor resided. At the beginning of Season 9, this grumpy old goat had ruffled Scar's feathers by asking him to shift the initially plotted plans for Scarland's foundations to make way for his industrial district. Throughout the entire season, Scar and this reclusive hermit amongst hermits had been constantly stepping on each other's toes and crossing paths, with Scarland's eastward expansion infringing on the perimeter's borders, and the goat's towering structures interfering with the theme park's meticulously designed skylines. They had long respected each other's boundaries, despite chafing against the constraints of their respective bases' footprints. But all of that was about to change. This lifeless abyss in which Scar and Green now recklessly journeyed was the perimeter, home to Doc M77. The Goat Father, he who grinds, optimizes, automates, and thrives. And by complete and catastrophic accident, Scar was about to cause the steadily simmering tensions between his theme park empire and Doc's automated metropolis to reach their tipping point. Diving down into a subterranean fissure drilled within the side of the perimeter's walls, Green and Scar soared through Doc's dark, dangerous mining tunnel silently, in search of shenanigans. At the end of this machine-carved cavern, they found their prize, the tunnel bore, Doc's automatic diamond digger. Wanting to borrow the mining machine while Doc was away to siphon some free diamonds for themselves, Green and Scar, unable to help themselves, both pressed the button to activate the tunnel bore simultaneously. The machine's slime block and piston skeleton sprung to life, beginning to hum and whir as it lumbered forth for duty. Both men braced themselves as they heard the hiss of TNT, expecting the tunnel bore to lurch forward and launch the explosives forward just at the moment of detonation. That moment never came.
Basically, this is free diamonds. What have you done?
No! Oh no, Scar! Scarlet in so much trouble!
Oh no!
Scarlet in so much trouble!
Oh no!
Scar!
Immediately, Scar took off flying, fleeing the scene of the crime at breakneck speed. Spamming firework rockets, he flew all the way into the Scarland Main Street bathrooms, sealed himself inside one of the stalls, logged out of the game, then wheeled into his actual real-life bathroom to hide, too. But it was too late. The ire of the goat had been provoked, and the only way this could possibly end now was with all-out prank warfare. This event, known only as the Incident, officially instigated the Great Perimeter Imbroglio. May 21st. 2023. Green and Scar attempted to put together a peace offering of diamonds and other assorted valuable trinkets in a last-ditch effort to appease the wrath of the goat. However, upon Doc's discovery that Scar's sacrifices were significantly hollower than expected, the horned lord of the perimeter vowed revenge upon the two miscreants who destroyed his prized machine. Perhaps sensing that the eve of war was upon him, Scar once more donned the skin-tight supersuit and shades of his anti-hero alter ego Hawkeye, finally finishing the interior and gift shop of the Hawkeye headquarters in the shopping district, complete with signed volleyballs, trading cards, and pin-up calendars of the shirtless, smirking superhero. And, as if Scar had decided that one server maid vowing vengeance upon him for his misdeeds wasn't enough, he also accidentally murdered BOO100's prized Day 1 horse, Miyamore, or as Scar called him, Alora Mora.
No, I'm so sorry. Oh no.
Suffice it to say, all was not well and good for Good Times with Scar in the Happiest Place on Hermitcraft. June 21st, 2023. After updating the server to 1.20, Scar logged in to discover the detritus of war was already littered all around his beloved, blemish-free theme park. It was a classic case of as above, so below. On the ground lay evidence of B-Dubs' horse curse with countless steeds and steaming blocks of manure staining his pristinely paved main street. And in the sky overhead floated explosive, perpetually frozen wither skulls, courtesy of the one who treads on cloven hooves. Electing to ignore his problems for now, and possibly pawn them off on the park's cleaning lady at a later date, Scar turned his attention back to the very start of Scarland's Main Street. Constructing a town hall to facilitate guest services and first aid, along with a custom Hermitcraft TCG theater where he someday hoped to host rounds of the popular trading card game, his plan was to install the official park gate next to give Scarland a proper entrance for guests upon its grand opening. Unfortunately, this plan would be summarily derailed by yet more mischief-making opportunities. July 2nd, 2023. Scar formally declares revenge against Doc M77 for the recent rash of retaliatory pranks that have plagued his precious park. Conferring with fellow instigator Grian, Scar confesses that deep down he has always harbored a desire to poke the goat. And luckily, Scar isn't the only one with a masked alter ego. In a superhero crossover episode for the ages, Hot Guy and Poultry Man team up to take on the goat and his perfidious hive mind by flooding the perimeter with lag-causing chickens, essentially committing a targeted act of terror on Doc's precious frames. This episode ends with yet more mischief and shenanigans, albeit those of the consensual variety, as Scar's other neighbor Mumbo Jumbo made his long-anticipated return to the server and requested Scar's help with the demolition of his old base. July 9th, 2023. Once again, Scar sets out with plans for peace, simply wanting to continue laying out the front entrance gate, gardens, and landscaping. However, those plans are immediately set aside when he is summoned to the edge of the perimeter by Grian and Mumbo to join the Buttercup Trio hippie commune with the hopes of staging a peace, love, and plants-themed resistance against the perimeter's industrial revolution. Although Grian and Mumbo already have a scheme in mind to stop the goat and his allies, involving a mechanized slime block walker inside a giant flower pot, they graciously decide to delegate the task of providing cookies and refreshments for their next meeting to Scar, a duty that Scar and his former elven cookie empire took very seriously indeed. While Scar and his now zombified elven bakers are firing up the old ovens back in his starter base, though, the goat is hard at work, and when Scar returns to his theme park from the Spawnlands, he discovers that though the chicken prank came first, it seems the egg has had the last laugh. July 20th, 2023. The entirety of Green, Scar, and Mumbo's bases are covered in immovable dragon eggs that are impossible to break or mine. Having already spent a fortune on Pearl services throughout the season, this latest financial hurdle appears to be the most insurmountable yet, and Scar is growing increasingly concerned by the steep cost of his prank war, worried it might break the bank on park funds when Scarland is so close to completion. It is at this point, however, that Scar finally remembered that he was an enterprising venture capitalist. For the first time in forever, he flew through the shopping district, dropping in on his various unintended businesses one by one, and discovering in the process that his previously unchecked shops had all turned a tidy profit. Even the Matador mattress store was completely cleaned out by hermits in need of supplies for nether bed mining. Suddenly flush with cash, Scar decided to spend his newly acquired wealth on more staff for Scarland. In addition to once more commissioning Pearl to clean up after the Eggpocalypse on Main Street, he also officially published a job posting to the server's bulletin board for the park's in-house redstone handyman. Much like Walt, Scar was an ideas man who required assistance with the mechanical moving parts to bring his creative vision to fruition. In the vein of Disney's Bob Gurr and other legendary Imagineers who enabled Walt's passion projects, Scar was looking for a backstage tinkerer who could help him seamlessly integrate the technological with the fantastical. Building out the rest of the Main Street off-floor backstage to connect with the new town hall, Scar even constructed a fully fitted redstone workshop for Impulse SV, the dwarven engineer he would eventually hire for his handyman position. Inside, he included countless Easter eggs and references to the park's coming attractions that had yet to be constructed, such as a Jungle Cruise boat for a river ride, and Minecraft mob audio animatronics for the dark rides he had been dreaming of. He even dubbed the engine of the work-in-progress Scarland train meant to encircle the park the Luxo Express, referencing both the Pixar Studios lamp mascot and his tiny toy share friend from the Empires crossover in tandem. July 23rd, 2023. Despite the brief lull in action, the war rages on. The next meeting of the Buttercups is nigh, and tensions with Doc and his toadying vassal, the former King Rendog, are at an all-time high. Scar's homemade flower-shaped cookies, unfortunately, have done little to de-escalate the situation. Both sides are prepared today to bring the conflict to a head with an all-out robot fight to the death. However, the Buttercup's resident redstone engineer Mumbo was a bit rusty at building slime block flying machines due to his hiatus, or perhaps due to his eating one too many of Scar's special cookies. In any event, the Buttercup blew itself up and malfunctioned almost immediately, but its catastrophic failure put itself in the path of the Goat Walker, tripping Doc's machine and interfering with its gate all the same. Not one to take a draw lying down, Doc then revealed his masterstroke, a pair of TNT-spewing butterflying machines set on a collision course for Scarland. Literally racing against time as the bombs began to detonate closer and closer to the park, Scar, Green, and Mumbo took to the sky, trading arrows with Doc and Ren as they desperately tried to shoot them out of the cockpit so they could break and disable the flying machine's piston propulsion. At the last possible second, Scar managed to break a few pivotal slime blocks to stop Butterbot and Mothra from completing their bombing run, but the damage was already done, and the ground just outside Scarland was covered in smoking, smoldering craters from the blasts. The Buttercups were outgunned by the superior technological and military might of the perimeter, and every day, Doc grew further emboldened, his tyranny even extending to a server-wide public address system playing goat propaganda around the clock. It was clear that this war had officially reached its endgame. All out of cards to play, Grian summoned his fellow hippies for one final meeting to enact their last, desperate plan to defeat Doc once and for all. August 19th, 2023. Over the course of a week, while Doc was away from the server, the Buttercup trio slowly but surely covered the entirety of the deliberately dug perimeter in grass. 250,000 grass blocks, fully terraformed, were returned to their rightful place by Scar, Grian, and Mumbo with the help of Joe Hills of Nashville, Tennessee, False Symmetry, Gemini Tay, and Impulse SV. Armed with saplings and bone meal provided by Exhumavoid, the Buttercups and their allies then covered the perimeter in grass, trees, and foliage once more, restoring the land to its natural beauty. Everyone on Hermitcraft braced themselves for the retaliation from the goat upon his return, but instead, Doc just laughed. Feeling that his grind had finally found an equal in the will of the hermits, he conceded defeat, and tensions on the server once more began to cool as a wave of catharsis washed over the realm. On August 25th, 2023, with the war over, peace restored to the server, and the park gates finally operational thanks to Handyman Impulse, Scar officially declared Phase 1 of Scarland, from Main Street all the way to Queen Jelly's castle, complete and open to the paying public. Printing his very own tickets and only charging 5 diamonds a pop per day's admission, throughout the rest of the season, Scarland would be frequented by fellow hermits and special guests as one of the server's premier entertainment and amusement destinations. Good Times with Scar's longtime dream had at long last been realized. The only attempted retaliation for the perimeter prank came from Doc's disgruntled right-hand man, Ren, who hastened construction of a cheap imitation version of Scar's magnum opus called Scabland to coincide with the actual theme park's on-server opening. Unfortunately for Ren, Scar literally did not notice Scabland whatsoever until well over a full year later, and the former king's attempted tourist trap was unsuccessful at drawing attention. Upon finally discovering the knockoff theme park that had been trying and failing to siphon crowds from Scarland right next door, Scar merely snorted and remarked that it looked like, quote, something a child made. Despite officially opening to the public, however, Scar's attention always remained fixated on the next big thing for his beloved park. On September 25th, 2023, he officially announced the commencement of Scarland Phase 2, which would last for the next 3 months, all the way up until the end of the season and the closure of the server. Even as the rest of his friends became hooked on the Decked Out 2 craze taking Hermitcraft by storm, Scar was busy cooking up a storm of his own, a storm of shadowy glass panes smoking out of the custom-made crit of his volcano, meant to be the official weenie for the park's first land. Adventure Isles, which was predominantly landlocked despite its misleading name, was meant to be the eventual location of the Scarland river rafting ride and jungle cruise, and the volcano at its center would contain the track layout. It was also, incidentally, designed in such a way that the mountain itself and the custom foliage surrounding it would obscure Doc's perimeter flag and the surrounding server completely from view, making the park feel more like its own isolated little world. Throughout the rest of October and November, Scar continued to chip away at Phase 2, painfully aware that he was running out of time. The basin of the volcano was filled with custom-textured glass fog lava to glow after dark, like in Tokyo Disney Sea, and the surrounding areas closest to it were terraformed to look like an ecological dead zone, with burnt trees and ash-covered hills. Scar even began inserting his first audio animatronics into the jungle, meant to be discovered as a special surprise by pedestrians and parkgoers as they took the winding trails through the tropical Adventure Isles. Relentlessly, he pressed forward, refurbishing the interior of the town hall to add a nurse's office and tour group meeting spot, and patched up the lobby of his still unfinished TCG theater. The final thing he built in Scarland was his very own office, caring more about the construction of the quarters for his employees than he ever did for his own. Located in the tallest tower of Queen Jelly's castle, and giving him an uninterrupted view of the park at sunset, it would be the resting place for all of Scar's Season 9 memorabilia, and the final sight he saw before logging off from the server for the final time that season. On December 22nd, 2023, just as Scar was putting his finishing touches on the park, he was also preparing to say goodbye to his happy place. The end of Hermitcraft Season 9 marked the official end of construction on Scarland in its current form, but it also marked the theme park's official general admission opening date, as with the world download, the entire Hermitcraft community was now welcomed in through its towering gates. For 656 days, Scar had pushed himself to the very brink in an attempt to make his lifelong dream a reality. Throughout Season 9, he had suffered an injury to his vocal cords, physical and mental health issues stemming from his chronic condition, problems with his antibiotics, and a nasty string of infections, and even the loss of family members. But despite it all, Scarland stood complete, a shining beacon of dreams that, while once deferred, had finally been realized through the single-minded, single-handed determination of Good Times with Scar. And now, after almost 2 years of work, he was ready to say goodbye. Tragically, it would not be the only goodbye Scar would have to say that winter. Jelly passed away on January 4th, 2024, just a little while after the grand opening and completion of the theme park Scar had built, entirely in her honor. For 17 and a half years, she had been Scar's consistent companion, always by his side through the darkest of times, waiting to greet him when he returned from a tough day in the hospital or yowling incessantly while he was trying to record videos for his YouTube channel. Her presence and the light it brought to his life was the inspiration for Scar, giving his childhood dream a second chance, and even after her passing, Scarland would forever be dedicated to her memory. For almost a full year, Scarland sat unattended to, with Scar understandably keeping his distance as the memories of his feline friend were too much for him to bear. But on November 3rd, 2024, he officially made his return to the park on a very special livestream, taking viewers on a trip down memory lane as he walked through the megabase he was always most fond of. However, when he did, much of Scar's recollections were tainted by all he felt he had failed to accomplish. A treasure-plundering roller coaster featuring an animatronic dragon beneath the castle, the log flume and jungle cruise ride in Adventure Isles, a super smelter roller coaster built inside the volcano, a haunted mansion-inspired dark ride, Cubs, nightly fireworks shows at the castle, the ticket booths, official security and cast member changing rooms, the TCG theater interior, a Ferris wheel, a roller coaster collaborating with Tango Tech in the style of Expedition Everest and Animal Kingdom, the Queen Jelly restaurant inside of her castle, the sci-fi city to solve Scar's long-standing problem of Tomorrowland, the fantasy village behind the castle. All of these were planned for Phase 2 and 3 of Scarland, and all of these projects never saw the light of day in the park's original incarnation. But perhaps instead of focusing on the Scarland that never was, it's better to focus on the Scarland that still is to this very day. Cleaning Lady Pearl and Handyman Impulse put their own touches and flourishes on the park, with the sanitation station and Impulse's full decked-out office and drum kit. Cast Services Cleo's mannequins posed to populate the park with life, Tango Tech the armor stand gardener, Fwip and Scott's additions to the Scarland Hotel, Mythical Sausage's Razor Crest, all of the amazing art and custom models for Scarland's myriad merchandise. All of these were ways the closely knit community of the Hermitcraft server wove themselves into the fabric of Scarland's story. And this, more than anything else, is the legacy of Scarland. It will be remembered not just as a dream come true for its creator, but as a place that inspired others to make their own dreams come true, too. When Scar started work on his very own theme park, he wanted to find ways to recreate and replicate his family's favorite rides, find ways to involve his friends into the narrative he was constructing. But the warmth of his welcoming made it so that all were welcome through those glimmering gates, and so Scarland became an entire community's land, too. Countless amazing artists were inspired to create their own depictions of the park in all its glory, a project that culminated in the unofficial Scarland art book, with many of the phenomenal pieces contained therein seen and showcased throughout the course of this very video. The book's physical release managed to raise over $100,000 in donations for Give Kids the World Village, a non-profit resort dedicated to bringing joy to children with critical illnesses. The Hermitcraft server's own partnership with Gamers Outreach, which started thanks in part to the Scarland story in Season 9, has continued to this day, and their charity events together have regularly raked in an average of $800,000 in donations for the past 2 years now. And in the culmination of an entire career's worth of advocacy and dogged determination, GoodTimesWithScar recently joined the organization's board of directors in April of 2025, giving him the opportunity to directly make a difference in the lives of children suffering from chronic conditions much like his own. And all of this started because of a little boy who wanted to make his own theme park someday. In the Return to Scarland stream, Scar revealed to his audience that he still hoped to return to the park someday, albeit in creative mode now due to the tremendous time and tax survival building imposes upon him. It is uncertain but possible that the elements of Scarland will be copied and pasted into a fresh world, giving him a blank canvas onto which to sculpt the remainder of his magnum opus. Though the story of Scarland will surely continue, this chapter of its story, the chapter defined by its interwoven history with the wild and wonderful world of Hermitcraft, and all the colorful characters found therein, has definitively come to a close. And yet, the mere fact that Scarland goes on regardless, in spite of it all, is all the more reason to believe that this theme park, though virtual, is a real theme park, after all. When speaking about the creation of Disneyland, years after the park had first opened, Walt Disney opined, "I wanted something live, something that could grow, something I could keep plussing with ideas. The park is that. Even the trees will keep growing. The thing will get more beautiful every year." Always creating, never stagnating, Walt Disney kept looking forward. and though he had no way of knowing that his vision would be honored even after he died, Disneyland carried on. Walt had no way of knowing that in realizing his own dream, he would go on to inspire the dreams of countless others. Scar was inspired by Disneyland, and the park he built in its image became an inspiration to countless others, too. Scar's friends, family, fans, and an entire community's worth of artists fell in love with his vision of Scarland, solely because to him that vision was so blinding in its brilliance. Grian said it best: everything Scar builds contains a beautiful piece of his soul. And so Scarland, too, and the memory of the plucky little cat that inspired it, will endure forever. Perhaps somewhat ironically, Scarland embodies the founding dream of Disneyland better than even Disneyland itself does. Scarland is the story of a man with a dream he followed with mind and heart, and when that dream became a reality, it was a dream come true, for you and me. With the release of the World Download, Scarland succeeded in delivering on the impossible promise of the theme park that inspired it. You can download the world for yourself. Scarland can literally be your land, a place where you can tell your own stories, make your own memories, find your own solace from the world. The lifelong dream of its singular creator, GoodTimesWithScar, Scarland stands as a testament to the eternal truth that there really is a great big beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away. But that's just the way your humble and unbiased host sees it. I hope you all enjoyed this very special episode of Defunctcraft. That'll do it for me. I'm Frostbyte Freeman, and until next time, stay frosted.